We're talking about taxes and your money today on Fixing the Money Thing.
We have the expert Dan Pilla with us again, talking about taxes.
So our responsibility as Christians is to follow the law, not to just turn your pockets out because the IRS might say, well, you owe this or you owe that. If you owe it, you have a responsibility to pay it. But if you don't owe it, you don't have a responsibility to pay it. And I think that's an important lesson that we need to understand here.
Yeah.
And I would tell you, and the IRS would tell you, that you as the citizen have an affirmative duty to look through that tax return to make sure it's accurate. But people don't even know what they're looking at, Gary. They have no idea whether it's accurate or not.
Gary and his friend, tax litigator, author, and executive director of the Tax Freedom Institute, Dan Pilla, discuss what you need to know for this tax season today on Fixing the Money Thing.
I'm Gary Keesee, and for 9 years, we lived in a chaotic, stress-filled, visionless life. I cried out to God. He said, I want my people free.
America's financial coach, Gary Keesee, shares the kingdom principles that changed his life, defeated his debt, and set him free.
You'll never find your destiny until you fix the money thing. Hey, welcome to Fixing the Money Thing. I'm Gary Keesee, and today we are talking about your favorite topic, taxes. And we have the expert, Dan Pilla, with us again, talking about taxes. A lot changing, Dan. How are you doing over there?
I'm doing well, Gary. It's good to see you.
But Dan, you know, Jesus was once confronted with this topic of taxes in Mark chapter 12. And they said, should we pay taxes, right? And Jesus said to them, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. So we have to pay taxes, but I guess the amount is a big discussion, how much we pay.
Well, that's exactly right. And it's important to understand a couple of things. Of course, the Pharisees were trying to trap Jesus and get him into a position where he would say something that would get him in trouble with the Roman government. The Roman government, as you well know, Gary, had no patience for rebellion and no patience for tax protesting, right? They wanted their money and they wanted it now, and they were going to use whatever brutal method they had to collect the money. So Jesus knew that. He knew that they were trying to trap him. And when he says pay taxes to Caesar, he did so with an illustration. He asked the questioner to get out a coin, and he says whose inscription is on the coin, and the questioner, the Pharisee, says Caesar is on the coin. Mm-hmm. And so Jesus, that's when he says, render to Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and to God that which belongs to God. And what he's really saying there is that the Roman Empire at the time, the Roman emperor, was the legal authority over Palestine, over the Jewish nation at that point in time, right? So we have a responsibility to follow the law. Well, we've got a law in this country. It's not an emperor, thankfully, but it is the Internal Revenue Code, which might be worse, really.
Yeah, right.
when you look at the terms of the tax code. So our responsibility as Christians is to follow the law, not to just turn your pockets out because the IRS might say, well, you owe this or you owe that. If you owe it, you have a responsibility to pay it. But if you don't owe it, you don't have a responsibility to pay it. And I think that's an important lesson that we need to understand here. We are governed by statutes and we are governed by law in this country, not some arbitrary whim. And the law determines what your payment responsibility is, nothing else.
But Dan, we have talked before many times. How many words or how many pages is the tax code? I mean, you know the answer. I mean, how big is it? A paragraph or what?
Yeah, it's put it this way, Gary. The current size of the Internal Revenue Code is more than 4 million words. It's been changed more than 6,000 times just since 2001 alone. That doesn't even include what happened during the COVID years of 2020, 2021 into 2022 with all the tax law changes that occurred with those various acts that were passed. And by comparison, in 2001, the tax code was about 1.4 million words. Now we're north
Wow.
of 4 million. So the code is massive. It's always changing. And this is one of my biggest raps that I have with the tax code. Yes, we have a tax law. Yes, we're responsible to follow the tax law, but Congress has a responsibility, Gary, to pass laws, enact statutes that are simple to understand, particularly when those statutes require affirmative action on the part of the citizen. Citizens have an affirmative duty to do these various things under the code, and Congress has a responsibility to make those compliance requirements as simple as possible. We should not have to go out and hire lawyers and accountants for us to understand what our tax code compliance
Wait a
responsibilities
minute, Dan.
are.
Now explain. Now, obviously, the average citizen is not going to read 4 million words to figure out what they pay. So essentially, they've made it really just unavailable to the common man to have any kind of clue what they pay, yet they're held accountable to it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that is the nefarious part of the system. You sign that tax return under penalty of perjury. You're declaring that you've examined all of the forms and all the schedules that go in with your tax return, and you're declaring under penalty of perjury that it's accurate and truthful. And okay, fine. To the extent that you understand what you've done or what you're reporting, that's one thing. But Gary, people don't understand what's in these tax forms. Now, if you've got a simple form, where you're just reporting your W-2 income, and all you're doing is saying, okay, here's my W-2 income, and this is my marital status. I'm single, or I'm married, or I've got some kids, or whatever the situation may be. That might be quite simple. But as soon as you get into a more complex area where you've got maybe some rental income, or maybe some business income, or maybe you've got investment income of some kind, and now you start filing all these schedules that go along with your tax return. Schedule A, for example, to report all your itemized deductions, and Schedule B to report your interest and dividend income, and Schedule C to report your business income, and it goes on and on and on from that. People don't know what this stuff is, and
No.
they will engage a tax professional to prepare the return for them, and I would tell you, and the IRS would tell you, that you as the citizen have an affirmative duty to look through that tax return to make sure it's accurate. But people
Right.
don't even know what they're looking at, Gary. They have no idea whether it's accurate or not.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question that I've heard many times. When I talked to the IRS one time and I was questioning them about something on my return, the answer was, well, you signed it. You signed it, meaning that you signed it, you're liable for it. But you told me though, I don't know, a month ago or so, that there's still remedy for that when the accountant or CPA makes a mistake with your forms.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There is a remedy for that, and it's important people understand what it is. The remedy does not alleviate you from the tax liability. All right. If your form is prepared incorrectly and you owe more tax as a result of the error, the remedy I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with alleviating the tax
Sure,
bill.
I understand that.
Right? Because if your return was prepared correctly, you would have owed the tax, right? So what happens is when there's an error in the tax return, anytime you go through a tax audit, if you end up owing more money, whether a tax preparer, tax professional did your return or not, the IRS is going to charge you with what they call an accuracy penalty, which is a percentage of the tax liability. Generally speaking, it's a 20% penalty. So if the IRS says you owe us 10 grand, add another $2,000 for the accuracy penalty. But the penalty can be waived, Gary, whenever the taxpayer can demonstrate that they acted in good faith and based on a reasonable cause for their actions and didn't deliberately disregard IRS rules and regulations. When we're talking about the accuracy penalty, that good faith is a position that's established when you can show that you had some reasonable basis for making the claim. Well, what's a reasonable basis for making the claim? It could be a factual basis, or it could be reliance on counsel. All right. As an ignorant citizen who is doing their best to comply with the law, you have a right to rely on counsel in the preparation of your tax return to discharge your tax responsibilities. And when you relied in good faith on the advice of a tax preparer, and you provided the tax preparer with all of the accurate information they needed to prepare your return, and they made the mistake, you didn't. You provided accurate information and then acted on their advice based on what they prepared in the return. That constitutes reasonable cause, Gary, and that will give rise to cancellation of the penalties. And then, of course, when the IRS cancels the penalties, they cancel the interest on the penalties as well, and that reduces the additions to the tax, doesn't reduce the tax.
Yeah. Well, it sounds complicated. I mean, it is complicated.
Well, it is complicated, and it's complicated by design. But in my book, Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide, I've got an entire chapter in that book that deals specifically with penalties. Every taxpayer, Gary, whether they're having some problem with the IRS currently or not, every citizen needs to know how to deal with penalties. The IRS assesses about 40 million penalties every year against individuals and businesses. Well, Gary, there's only about 165 million individual tax returns filed every year. So this penalty assessment is a huge problem for people across the country. And whether you deliberately made a mistake or not, if there is an error in your return, you're going to be charged with a penalty, and the burden of proof is on the taxpayer to prove that the penalty doesn't apply. So use my book, the Dan Pilla Small Business Tax Guide. Use that chapter to acquaint yourself with the penalty process and how to challenge penalties so you don't end up paying more taxes than you owe. So you don't render to Caesar that which you don't owe to Caesar.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people do that. I read one article one time in Money Magazine that said about 25, the average citizen, I mean, all added together, the citizens of the United States pay about 25% more in tax than they have to. And that was Money Magazine's study. So
well, I believe that. I'm not sure the percentage exactly, but I've seen those studies. I've talked about those studies before. The fact of the matter is, people typically overpay their taxes, and they overpay their taxes, Gary, for a good reason. There's 4 million words in the tax code that people don't understand.
Right. I mean, that's okay. So I think people are just complicated, so they would rather just go ahead and pay the extra money instead of stirring up the IRS. But your books say it's worth stirring up the IRS, and really, they have a process that actually allows you to change things and things that are not that complicated if you just take the time to learn how it works. For instance, you can refile your 1040. You can do things. You're not locked into the loss if you find out you missed something.
Absolutely. And it's not a matter of stirring up the IRS, Gary. It really isn't a matter of stirring up the IRS. It's a matter of taking advantage of all of the legal opportunities and the rules that are in the tax code. I'll just give you the simplest example.
Okay.
There's people across the country that tithe on a regular basis to churches and charitable organizations to support the work of Christian ministry, right? And Christian charities. All right. You're entitled to claim a deduction on your tax return for your tithes and offerings that you give to charitable organizations and churches. Well, okay, why wouldn't you make that claim? All right, if you're entitled to claim the deduction to reduce your tax liability, why wouldn't you do that? Right? That's not a loophole. It's not an unfair deduction. It's not tax cuts for the rich. It's none of that nonsense. It's a rule in the Internal Revenue Code that allows the typical person to take advantage of a specific strategy. That's the law. The law gives you the right to do that. There's no reason not to do that. The Trump administration, of course, is talking about downsizing federal government. And they're talking about downsizing the Internal Revenue Service considerably as it attempts to drift toward an alternative tax system. I believe, Gary, that drifting toward an alternative tax system is a mistake. We have to move quickly to an alternative tax system because the nature of the system that we have now requires a great deal of taxpayer assistance on the part of the IRS. One of the biggest problems that I had with the Inflation Reduction Act appropriation, call it $60 billion, was that about 70% of that money, north of 70% of that money was going to be used for enforcement. All right. It was going to be 46% of it was directly pointed at enforcement, hiring more IRS revenue agents that do tax audits, revenue officers that do tax collection, and special agents that do criminal investigation. All right, so they're focusing on enforcement. The problem with that, and you'd say, well, it's a law enforcement agency, they should be doing that. Well, let me tell you something. The fact of the matter is 98% of every federal dollar collected by the IRS is paid in voluntarily. And what I mean by that is it's paid into the IRS without the need of enforcement action. All right, so think about that. 98% of every federal dollar collected is collected without the need of enforcement action. All right, so what happens is we are infinitely better off spending money on taxpayer assistance, education, and outreach than we are spending money on enforcement. Okay. There is far more to be gained by educating people on what they're supposed to do rather than chasing people who don't do what they're supposed to do. Now, I'm not saying you don't chase people who haven't done what they're supposed to do, but the overwhelming majority of problems we have with the IRS has nothing to do with deliberate disregard of IRS rules or criminal action where people are deliberately cheating. That's not what happens. The overwhelming majority of problems are caused by ignorance and misunderstanding. People don't know what they're supposed to do. When people are taught how to comply, the overwhelming majority of people will comply.
A lot of the IRS's enforcement's done automatically by the computer system that kicks out the penalty or kicks out, it's all, you're not really talking to an agent anyway. It's self-governed by itself, if I understand. I mean, if I make a mistake, no agent calls me. I get this letter in the mail, you made a mistake and you owe this. So,
yeah, you're exactly right. The vast majority of audits are done through a computerized process, no doubt. But tax collection, let's say you don't make a mistake on your tax return. You just don't pay the money that you owe. You file your tax return. You owe the IRS 10 grand. You don't have the money. So in the tax return goes, now the computer generated notices start coming out. And there are preliminary notices that say, hey, you owe some money. And then there's secondary notices that get a little sterner, right? Where's that money? And then you get the enforcement notices like levy notices and liens. And when you owe less than $100,000 to the IRS, which of course the overwhelming majority of people who are in debt with the IRS owe less than 100 grand, they owe more than 10, but less than 100, right? That is an automated collection function. The IRS has got a service that they call "quote unquote" service that they call the automated collection service.
Thank you.
Right?
So convenient. So convenient.
Yeah. It's so convenient. It's ACS, right? Unless you owe more than $100,000, you're not going to get contacted by a revenue officer, a live being who comes out to your door and knocks on the door, and she says, "Hey, you owe us this money. When can we expect payment?" When you owe less than 100 grand, it's all handled through ACS, and it's all notices, all computer notices, right? And so that is how the enforcement action goes on in the vast majority of cases. But Gary, it's even simpler than that. And that is this. 3 out of every $5 that are paid to the IRS, let me rephrase that a different way and say this. 3 out of every $5 that are collected by the IRS in taxes are not collected by the IRS at all. 3 out of every $5 that's paid into the system is paid in by employers through wage withholding. So the IRS doesn't do any collection when it comes to that, unless, of course, the employer becomes delinquent on paying over the employment taxes, which happens, and that's a significant area of enforcement, no doubt about that. But again, the IRS is not collecting that money. That money is being paid in voluntarily by employers, and it's not voluntary in the sense that you can decide to do it or not do it. That's not what I mean.
Okay, Dan, I got to change topics once again because obviously you're the man that can answer the question. We have tariffs, right? Canada, Mexico, I think China, and now Canada, Mexico has put tariffs on us. And I need some help understanding how this works. And is it going to just keep escalating? Now you're 50, I'll go 50. I mean, kind of help me understand the mindset behind this.
As far as China's concerned, talking about these additional 10% tariffs across the board, the United States of America, Gary, has the largest, the richest consumer market in the United States. China is pouring cheap goods into our country, has been for years. And one of the strategies that Trump is talking about in terms of leveling the playing field here is a little bit is to get tariffs on those products to raise the price of the products in the United States market. In other words, make the Chinese products less attractive to American consumers. And when the product is less attractive to American consumers, then American consumers theoretically are going to use domestically produced products or purchase domestically produced products, which of course has the benefit of increasing increasing productivity in the United States. All right, so that's the theory behind tariffs. Now, where I part company with the president is his remarks that we can fund the entire government of the United States on tariffs, and he points to the late 18th century, the late 19th century, early 20th century, when yes, we had no income tax at that time. He's absolutely right about that, and the vast majority of federal spending, the majority, I shouldn't say the vast majority of the federal budget was paid with tariffs. But we need to understand, Gary, if you look at the federal budget in the year 1900, for example, at the turn of the 20th century, the federal government only spent about $500 million.
Yeah,
right?
Wow.
We spend that today on pencils, as we've been learning here in the last couple of weeks, right? So it's not the same budgetary picture now as it was then.
Yeah.
But even at that, even at a $500 million annual budget, only about 70% of that revenue was raised through tariffs. The rest of the money was raised through manufacturers' excise taxes, like taxes on alcohol, taxes on sugar were a very big deal, taxes on coffee, imported coffee, these types of coffee. The combination of the excise taxes and the tariffs. Yeah. Couldn't spit the word out. Yeah. The combination of the revenue raised from excise taxes and tariffs represented roughly 100% of the federal budget. Yeah. There is no possible way. I mean, let's put this in perspective now. We have got about $6.7 trillion of annual spending. We're raising roughly $5.5 trillion of revenue. So the budget deficit's way out of whack. We all know that. Yeah. Right. So how are we going to raise enough money in tariffs to cover even the $5.5 billion of revenue that's being raised now? Just for reference, about 60%, not quite, about 60% of the revenue of that 5.5 trillion is raised through the personal income tax. So, I mean, it's a huge deficit or a spread between the tariff revenue that's being raised now and the tariff revenue that would need to be raised in order to replace the income tax. I don't think it's a feasible solution.
Doesn't sound like it. We're about out of time, Dan. Again, this is tax season. Would you talk about your small business book one more time?
Yeah, my Small Business Tax Guide, Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide, is the book that took me 40 years to write, Gary.
You're a slow writer.
By that is I'm a slow writer, a word a day. No, what I mean by that is that book is the culmination of 40 years worth of litigating with the IRS. All right, I've represented hundreds of small businesses in the United States Tax Court, thousands of small businesses in audits and appeals across the country, and what I have learned over that period of time is the most common mistakes that businesses make in dealing with their tax compliance issues and dealing with the IRS. And so the book consists of about 17 or 18 of these most common problems that businesses face, and I show you how to stay out of trouble with the IRS. So every small business owner in America needs to go through this book to avoid the problems that end you up in trouble with the IRS.
I agree. It's the best book I've ever seen. Well, Dan, thanks for joining us today, and if things get kind of stirred up out there, I'll call you back. We'll get you on here because laws could be changing as we speak. We don't know, but they're up there.
No question
they're
about
up
it.
there signing things right now. So if we need to pull you back in here, we will. But love you. Thank you for being with us again here on Fixing the Money Thing.
That's my pleasure, Gary. I'm always happy to help.
Thank you very much. And for our listeners and our viewers, go to GaryKeesee.com. We have a lot of information there. You'll also find information about how to get out of debt and some things to help you learn how the kingdom of God works and change your life. And so anyway, catch us again tomorrow here on Fixing the Money Thing, where you'll learn a lot about life and fixing your money thing. Till next time.
Gary wants to thank his amazing Team Revolution partners for helping share Dan Pilla's knowledge and expert advice with those who need it. It's not enough to be the creative genius behind your company. You also have to keep your company out of trouble with the IRS. Don't get clobbered for violating tax rules you never knew existed. If you currently operate or intend to operate your own small business, you need this important book by Dan Pilla.
My latest book is called Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide. I'm so excited about this book because this is the culmination of 40 years of litigating with the IRS.
My great friend Dan Pilla, who's been involved with tax litigation for 45, 50 years and knows, well, the Associated Press said this, knows more about the IRS than the IRS does itself.
Dan's Small Business Tax Guide, the complete guide to organizing and operating your small business, was created to help you and your company avoid the trials and pitfalls faced by nearly 500,000 new businesses each year.
You know, friends, I've seen every kind of tax problem you can imagine, and I've seen a few you can't.
This essential resource is available now when you call, write, or visit our website. Don't wait for the IRS to contact you.
And most small businesses get sideways with the IRS because they don't understand the complicated rules and formulas that have to be followed to stay out of trouble.
Dan's expertise covers the important topics and questions business owners have about their taxes, like organizational structure, hiring options, deductions, home offices, and avoiding the IRS's costly hobby loss rules. It also includes Dan's foolproof record-keeping system to keep you out of trouble with the IRS.
So what I've done in Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide is I've taken about 15 of the most common problems that businesses have, the 15 most common ways that small business people get sideways with the IRS, and I show you how to avoid those problems. I teach you the most important things that people need to know to stay out of trouble with the IRS in the first place.
With your tax guide, we also want to give you Gary's Revolution of the Mind, Finances, to make sure you have the strong foundation to build your business upon. This specially curated 30 minutes of scriptures will tune your mind to the kingdom.
Father, thank you that I have a spirit of wisdom and understanding, counsel and might and knowledge. Guide me in all of my financial affairs, Isaiah 11:2.
Tax season is here, so now is the time to call the number on your screen, visit us online, or write Faith Life Now.
I know, I've read the book. It's I'll say it again, every business owner or anyone who's thinking about going into business should have as a handbook. I mean, it's the best there is out there, that's a fact.
If you're a small business owner, you need Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide.
Hi, I'm Gary Keesee, and I want to invite you to this year's Provision Conference, April 23rd through the 25th. It's not just a conference, but an experience with the kingdom, and that changes everything. Fantastic speakers teaching you how to advance in 2026. I look forward to seeing you at this year's Provision Conference. But those that feel called to reach those same people and feel that we have that assignment can help us. And guess what? You also receive exactly the same reward we do when we heard Jesus call us, and you respond to that. That is called partnership. And I invite you today to be a partner with Faith Life Now. I am looking forward to having you as a partner, and I, your partner, the same.
How do you know when you have faith, and what should you do when you don't? Discover the answers free for a limited time in Doing Faith Right, a powerful booklet to help you get the clarity and understanding you need. Visit GaryKeesee.tv now to take advantage of this free resource. For more financial and kingdom resources, call or visit Gary's website today. Fixing the Money Thing is a broadcast presentation of Faith Life Now.